"Get your hands off that rifle case, lady. You're gonna hurt yourself." The words, slick with a cheap, unearned authority, cut through the low hum of the airport terminal. The crowd, a shuffling, tired river of humanity, eddied around the security checkpoint, and a few people chuckled, the sound nervous and complicit. The man who spoke, a TSA supervisor named Marks, whose uniform was a size too tight and whose name tag was worn like a medal of petty power, leaned over the stainless steel table, a smirk plastered on his face. He looked at the woman before him, taking in her faded jeans, her simple gray hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to her forearms, and the dark hair pulled back into a severe, functional bun. She was of average height, with a wiry, almost lean build that his gaze dismissed as frail. She was, in his professional estimation, a nobody, a tourist, maybe a college student, who had foolishly tried to bring something dangerous and complicated into his domain. But when the retired four-star general 2 lines back, a man whose eyes had seen the rise and fall of nations, saw her stance. The way her feet were planted shoulder-width apart, the perfect, relaxed posture, the almost imperceptible stillness in her hands. He felt a sudden, cold jolt of recognition, a ghost from a world of discipline and lethal quiet. The woman, for her part, did not react. She did not flinch, she did not scowl, she did not even meet the supervisor's condescending gaze. Her eyes, a deep, placid brown, remained fixed on the latches of her hardened rifle case, as if his words were nothing more than the distant announcement of a delayed flight. Her silence was not submission. It was a vacuum, a void of emotion that pulled all the tension in the area toward it, a silence more profound and unsettling than any shouted retort could ever be. It was the calm at the absolute center of a hurricane, a place of unnerving peace that hinted at the unimaginable power churning just beyond its edge. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself and that competence is the only voice that matters, type silence in the comments below. For the supervisor, this lack of response was simply more fuel for his ego. He saw it as fear, as the confusion of someone caught out, and he pressed his advantage, his voice rising in volume to play to the small audience he had gathered. "What's a little thing like you doing with a piece of hardware like this, huh? Playing soldier? Your boyfriend forget his toy?" He tapped the case with a thick finger, a rhythmic, patronizing beat that echoed the thumping of his own self-importance. He was a man who had mistaken a small metal badge for a crown and a checkpoint for a kingdom. He had no way of knowing that the woman standing before him, Anya Sharma, had spent the last decade operating in places that didn't appear on maps, in environments so hostile they were considered functionally unsurvivable. He could not possibly comprehend that her call sign, Echo, was a legend whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in the most elite echelons of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group, more commonly known as SEAL Team 6. Her hands, which he had just implicitly insulted, had field-stripped and reassembled this very rifle, an M210 enhanced sniper rifle, a tool of almost surgical precision, in pitch blackness, under fire, in the frozen mountains of the Hindu Kush and the suffocating humidity of forgotten jungles. They had set bones, treated wounds, and delivered a terrifying, final piece to men who had built empires of terror. Her silence was a professional courtesy, a deeply ingrained discipline of de-escalation that he was tragically misinterpreting as weakness. She was giving him an off-ramp, a chance to simply do his job and let her proceed. It was a chance he was too arrogant, too blind to take. The onlookers shuffled their feet, some embarrassed, others morbidly curious to see how the public shaming would play out. They saw what the supervisor saw, an unremarkable woman and an overzealous security agent. They did not see the coiled potential in her stillness. They did not notice that while the supervisor postured and preened, her gaze had already subtly swept the area, cataloging exits, identifying other security personnel, noting the position of the general whose face was now a mask of cold fury, and assessing the potential collateral damage in a three-dimensional mental map of the concourse. Her mind was a finely tuned threat assessment engine, and right now, the largest, most immediate, and most irritating variable was the man with the shiny badge and the loud mouth. She simply needed to get to her connecting flight. She was en route to a memorial service for a former spotter, a man who had died not in combat, but in a quiet hospital bed from a cancer that had done what no enemy ever could. The rifle in the case wasn't for a mission. It was for the ceremonial 21 gun salute. It was an object of legacy, of respect, and this man was treating it, and by extension that legacy, with a casual, profane disrespect that was beginning to wear on her infinite patience. She finally lifted her gaze from the case and met his eyes. There was no anger. There was no fear. There was only a profound, unnerving emptiness, a look that said, "You have no idea what you are doing." She said nothing, her silence a final, unspoken warning. The supervisor, however, read it as a challenge. His smirk tightened. "All right, princess, let's see what you've got in here. I'm going to have to inspect this personally, and you're going to stand right there and not touch anything." He fumbled with the latches, his fingers clumsy and unsure, a stark contrast to the methodical grace with which she had been about to open it herself. The tension in the air became a physical thing, a tightening in the chest of every person watching. The general, 2 lines back, took a half-step forward, his training and instinct screaming at him that something was about to break. He knew that look. He had seen on the faces of the most dangerous men and women he had ever commanded, right before they did something that would be talked about for a generation. It was the look of a professional being pushed past the point of professional courtesy. It was the look of a storm about to make landfall. The supervisor, Marks, finally managed to pop the 2 heavy-duty latches on the Pelican case. The hiss of equalizing air pressure was unnaturally loud in the strained quiet that had fallen over the checkpoint. With a flourish of theatrical self-importance, he swung the lid open. Inside, nestled in custom-cut, high-density foam, lay the M210 enhanced sniper rifle. It was not a flashy, tactical fantasy weapon for video game. It was a thing of brutal, functional beauty. The matte black finish of the chassis absorbed the harsh fluorescent light of the terminal, giving it a depth that seemed to pull the eye inward. Every component, from the massive scope with its complex turret knobs to the precisely machined bolt and the gently worn pistol grip, spoke of a life of serious, meticulous use. It was a tool, not a toy, and its presence radiated a gravity that sobered some of the onlookers. It was clear this was not the property of a casual hobbyist. Marks, however, was undeterred. The sheer professionalism of the weapon's presentation only served as a greater offense to his ego. It was a world he didn't belong to, and so he had to denigrate it. Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look at this." All dressed up with nowhere to go, he reached a hand out, not toward the rifle itself, but toward the data book tucked into a neat slot beside it. This was a small, spiral-bound notebook filled with pages of handwritten tables, charts, and notes. To a layman, it was gibberish. To a sniper, it was their Bible, a meticulous record of every shot ever fired from that rifle, chronicling atmospheric conditions, distances, windage, and the subtle idiosyncrasies of the weapon. It was a deeply personal, almost sacred document, the culmination of thousands of hours of training and operational experience. Anya's hand moved, a blur of motion so fast it barely registered. She didn't touch him. She simply laid her hand flat on the book, covering it. Her movement was economical, precise, and utterly final. It was a statement. "That is not part of your inspection," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of inflection, a simple statement of fact. It was the first thing she had said beyond a quiet yes when he'd first called her over. The sound of her voice, calm and clear, seemed to momentarily break the spell. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Mark's face. The speed of her movement, the absolute certainty in her tone. It didn't align with the image of the timid woman he had constructed in his mind. But his pride had been publicly committed. To back down now would be to lose face in front of the shuffling audience and his own subordinates. So he doubled down on the one thing he had left, his perceived authority and his physical advantage. "I'll decide what's part of my inspection," he snarled, his face reddening. And I told you not to touch anything. And then he made the final, catastrophic mistake. He reached out, not for the book, not for the rifle, but for her. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging into the fabric of her hoodie, intending to pull her away from the table. But his hand had barely closed when he decided to escalate further, to humiliate her completely. He let go of her arm and reached for her head, his fingers tangling in the tight bun of her hair, intending to physically drag her back. "What did I just say?" he spat, his face inches from hers. The crowd gasped. A line had been crossed. This was no longer a security check. It was assault. The general, Wallace, started to shout, "Officer, stand down, now." But his voice was lost in the sudden, violent shift in reality. The moment Mark's fingers made contact with her hair, something fundamental changed in Anya Sharma. The placid emptiness in her eyes was replaced by a look of pure, cold, analytical focus. It was the look of a predator that had just been foolishly prodded by its prey. The world seemed to slow down, to stretch like taffy. To the onlookers, what happened next was a confusing, instantaneous blur. But in the slowed-down reality of Anya's perception, it was a sequence of simple, biomechanical equations. Equation 1. His hand in her hair provided a point of leverage. Equation 2. His forward momentum and aggressive posture had left his center of gravity fatally compromised. Equation 3. The human wrist and elbow are designed to bend in specific directions, and they fail when forced to do otherwise. Her left hand, the one that had been resting on the data book, came up. It did not strike. It did not punch. It simply met his. Her fingers enveloped the back of his hand, her thumb pressing down on a specific nerve cluster just below his knuckles. Simultaneously, her right hand moved from her side to his elbow. There was a subtle shift of her hips, a pivot on the ball of her left foot that was as practiced and unconscious as breathing. She did not resist his pull. She redirected it, using his own aggressive energy against him. She flowed with his momentum, turning his forward lunge into a spiraling descent. There was a single, sharp cry of pain from Marks as his wrist was forced into a position it was never meant to hold. His fingers unspasmed from her hair instantly. The pressure on his elbow guided him downward, his body folding like a cheap suit. Anya did not throw him. She did not slam him to the ground. She placed him there with a terrifying, almost gentle control. He ended up on his knees, his face inches from the cold linoleum floor, his arm locked in a position of absolute submission. Her knee was pressed lightly against his back, not as a threat, but as a simple, physical fact preventing him from rising. The entire sequence, from the moment his hand touched her hair to the moment his knee hit the floor, had taken less than 1.5 seconds. It was over before anyone, including Marks himself, had fully processed that it had begun. The takedown was utterly devoid of anger or malice. It was as clean and clinical as a surgical procedure. It was the physical embodiment of quiet competence. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the security concourse. The low hum of the ventilation system, the distant roll of luggage wheels, the tinny announcement from the PA system, it all faded away into a thick, ringing void. Every eye was locked on the tableau at the checkpoint. The arrogant, loudmouth supervisor was on his knees, his face a mask of shocked, agonizing disbelief, held in place not by brute force, but by the calm, precise application of leverage from the woman he had just been publicly humiliating. Anya Sharma remained standing, her posture unchanged. One hand was still gently controlling his locked arm. The other rested lightly on her hip. Her hair was slightly mussed from his grip, a few strands falling loose around her face, the only visible sign of the brief, one-sided struggle. She was breathing calmly, her chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. She looked, if anything, bored, as if she were waiting for a bus. The crowd was frozen. Jaws were literally agape. The nervous laughter from moments before was a distant, shameful memory. In its place was a collective sense of awe and shock. They had all witnessed a fundamental law of nature being overturned. The meek had not just inherited the earth, they had effortlessly, and with terrifying grace, put the powerful in its place. The other TSA agents, who had been smirking along with their supervisor, were paralyzed. Their training manuals had no chapter for this. Their protocols did not cover what to do when their boss was neutralized by a civilian in a hoodie with the speed and efficiency of a lightning strike. One of them, a younger agent, fumbled for his radio, his hand shaking. "We have a situation at Checkpoint Charlie," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Supervisor is down." The word down felt inadequate. Marks wasn't down in the way a person is after a fight. He was placed. He was solved. The agent on the radio couldn't articulate that the woman hadn't even raised her voice. He couldn't explain that the violence had been so controlled, so precise, that it felt more like a physics demonstration than a brawl. Marks finally found his voice, a strangled, pathetic gasp. "My arm. You broke my arm," he wheezed, sweat beading on his forehead. "No," Anya said, her voice still a low, dispassionate monotone. "I have not. Your wrist is locked at the joint, and your elbow is hyperextended. If you relax, there will be no damage. If you struggle, you will dislocate your own shoulder." Her diagnosis was delivered with the clinical detachment of a doctor explaining a patient's chart. There was no triumph in her voice. "No, I told you so. It was simply information." This, more than the physical pain, seemed to shatter Marks completely. The cold, technical precision of her language stripped him of the last vestiges of his bravado. He wasn't a victim of a brawl. He was the subject of an expert's technique. He was an amateur who had tried to play a professional's game and had been instantly and irrevocably outclassed. He stopped struggling, his body going limp with a mixture of pain and humiliation. The sheer, undeniable proof of her skill was a more profound defeat than any punch could have been. The irony was so thick, it was almost suffocating. He had warned her she would hurt herself with the rifle, and instead, he had been effortlessly dismantled by her bare hands. He had called her little thing, and that little thing was now controlling his entire body with the pressure of a few fingers. Every insult he had hurled at her had been turned back on him, not with words, but with a quiet, devastating demonstration of reality. The frozen tableau was finally broken by the authoritative stride of General Wallace. He moved with a purpose that parted the sea of stunned travelers. His face was a thundercloud of controlled rage. He didn't look at Anya. He looked at the other TSA agents who were still standing around like statues. "Secure the perimeter and get these people moving," he commanded, his voice the baritone of a man used to absolute obedience. He pointed at the young agent with the radio. "Get your manager and airport police here." Now, the agents, jolted into action by a voice that carried more authority than their own entire chain of command, scrambled to obey. Wallace then knelt beside Marks, his knees cracking slightly. He didn't look at Anya's handiwork with surprise, but with a kind of grim, professional appreciation. He looked at Mark's contorted face, and his voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. "You have made a catastrophic error in judgment, son. You are lucky to be conscious. You are lucky to have a functioning arm. Now, I'm going to ask this young lady to release you, and you're going to remain on the floor until the police arrive. Do you understand me?" Marks, his eyes wide with fear and pain, could only manage a weak, pathetic nod. The general then looked up at Anya for the first time. His gaze was no longer just one of recognition. It was one of deep, profound respect. He saw the loose strands of her hair, the calm set of her jaw, and the absolute control she was exercising. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she could have ended the man's life in the same span of time it took her to subdue him. He was looking at a level of skill and discipline that was, for all intents and purposes, a superpower. "Ma'am," he said, his voice formal and respectful, a stark contrast to the supervisor's earlier insults. "If you would," Anya simply nodded. With the same fluid economy of motion, she released the pressure, straightened his arm, and stepped back. It was as if she were retracting a tool she had just used. She took one step back, her hands falling to her sides, and resumed her original, relaxed stance. The entire incident was over. The physical confrontation had ended, but the true reckoning had only just begun. The shockwave from that 1.5-second event was about to ripple outwards, and it would change everything. The arrival of the airport police and a harried-looking terminal manager added a new layer of officialdom to the scene, but did little to dispel the atmosphere of stunned disbelief. 2 uniformed officers cautiously approached Marks, who was now sitting up, clutching his arm and staring at the floor, his face a mottled canvas of shame and residual pain. The manager, a man named Henderson whose tie was already askew, rushed toward General Wallace, his expression a mixture of panic and deference. "General, I came as soon as I heard. What on earth happened here?" Henderson's eyes darted from the dejected form of his supervisor to Anya, who stood quietly by her open rifle case, an island of calm in the sea of chaos she had created. He, like Marks before him, saw a young woman in a hoodie and made a series of rapid, incorrect assumptions. His instinct was to defend his employee. "Sir, my agent reported an assault on a federal officer," he began, but Wallace cut him off with a sharp, slicing motion of his hand. "Your agent initiated an unwarranted physical confrontation with a member of the United States Armed Forces who was complying with all transport protocols," Wallace stated, his voice cold and hard as granite. "What you witnessed was not an assault. It was a textbook, nonviolent control technique executed in self-defense. And frankly, Mr. Henderson, your man is lucky he didn't try that with someone less disciplined." Henderson was taken aback. "A member of the armed forces?" He looked at Anya again, this time with a sliver of confusion. Her unassuming appearance didn't fit his mental image of a soldier. He expected a uniform, a high and tight haircut, something that announced her status. He saw none of that. Wallace ignored the manager's confusion and turned his full attention to Anya. The fury on his face softened into something else, a look of quiet, shared understanding. It was the look of one professional recognizing another across the vast gulf of civilian life. "Ma'am, I am General Robert Wallace, United States Army, retired. I apologize for the conduct of this individual. It was unprofessional and unacceptable." Anya met his gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Understood, sir," she replied. Her voice was steady, betraying no emotion. Wallace then addressed one of the police officers. "Officer, I was a direct witness to the entire event. The supervisor was the sole aggressor. I need to see this young lady's identification and travel orders to ensure everything is by the book. But I assure you, the issue here is with the TS, not with her, the officer." A young man whose face was still pale with shock from the story he'd heard over the radio nodded gratefully. "Yes, sir. Ma'am, could I see your ID, please?" Anya reached into the back pocket of her jeans and pulled out a slim leather wallet. She opened it and extracted 2 cards, handing them to the officer. One was a standard state driver's license. The other was a dark green common access card, the standard identification for active-duty military personnel. The officer took the cards. He looked at the driver's license first. Anya Sharma. He then looked at the military ID. He saw the same name, the same picture. Then he saw the rank listed below her name. His eyes widened slightly. He looked up at her, then back at the card, then back at her again, a silent question in his expression. He handed the card to Wallace. "General, maybe you should see this." Wallace took the CAC. He held it in his palm, his thumb covering the photo for a moment as he read the text. He saw her name, Sharma, ANYA. He saw her rank, Senior Chief Petty Officer, an E8, a senior non-commissioned officer with decades of experience, not the young student Marks had assumed her to be. This alone was enough to make the supervisor's actions a grave error. But that wasn't what made Wallace's breath catch in his throat. It was the small, almost hidden designation printed on the card, a short series of letters and numbers that, to the uninitiated, meant nothing. But to General Wallace, a man who had spent his entire life in the world of classified operations and shadowy warfare, it was like seeing a ghost. His entire demeanor shifted. The authoritative anger vanished, replaced by a profound, almost reverent stillness. He looked from the card to her face, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the faint, silvery scar just above her right eyebrow. He saw the unnerving intelligence in her calm eyes. He saw the quiet confidence that he now understood was not arrogance, but the absolute certainty of a master of a deadly craft. He knew. "My God," he whispered, the words barely audible. He turned to the stunned manager and the police officers, his face grim. "Mr. Henderson, you and your supervisor need to come with me. Officer, please provide this sailor with any assistance she requires and ensure she makes her connecting flight. Her travel is a matter of national security." Henderson sputtered. "National security? What are you talking about? She's a petty officer." Wallace slowly, deliberately turned to face him, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made the manager physically recoil. "You are a child playing with matches in a munitions depot," Wallace said, his voice a low, lethal hiss. "That is not a petty officer. That is Senior Chief Sharma. You see the designator on this ID? Do you have any idea what that means?" He didn't wait for an answer. "It means she belongs to a unit that the government of the United States does not officially acknowledge exists. It means she has spent more time in active combat zones than you have spent sleeping in your own bed. It means she is one of the most highly trained, highly decorated, and profoundly dangerous individuals in the entire United States military." He took a step closer to Henderson, lowering his voice even further, so only the manager and the cops could hear. "The rifle in that case is not just a gun. It is an extension of her will, and with it, she has personally protected heads of state and eliminated threats to this nation that you will never, ever read about. The man on the floor, your supervisor, didn't just insult a sailor. He physically assaulted an operator from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He put his hands on a Tier 1 asset. He put his hands on a goddamn Navy SEAL." The revelation hung in the air, thick and heavy. The words Navy SEAL landed with the force of a physical blow. The police officers stared at Anya with a newfound awe and terror. Henderson's face went completely white. He looked at Anya, this quiet, unassuming woman, and tried to reconcile that image with the monstrous, mythic reputation of the unit Wallace had just named. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The calm, the efficiency, the takedown, the absolute lack of fear. It all made a terrible, perfect sense. Wallace wasn't finished. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "And one more thing you should know, just so you understand the gravity of your failure today. Within that community, they have names for the legends. The ones who are better than the best. Her call sign is Echo. If you ever hear that name again, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that you and your man here nearly created an interagency incident of unimaginable proportions over a cheap power trip." He straightened up and handed the ID back to Anya. Then, in the middle of the crowded airport terminal, in front of everyone, General Robert Wallace, a decorated and respected four-star general, drew himself up to his full height and rendered a sharp, perfect, formal salute to the senior chief petty officer standing before him in a hoodie and jeans. It was a gesture of such profound, shocking respect that it silenced the entire concourse for a second time. It was the ultimate validation. It was the world being set right. The general salute was a declarative act, a public correction of a universe. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. The image was surreal. The towering, decorated general, his posture ramrod straight, his hand a crisp line from his brow, offering the highest form of military respect to the quiet woman in civilian clothes. Anya, in response, simply brought her own hand up in a graceful, understated acknowledgement, not a full salute as she was not in uniform, but a clear gesture of mutual respect. It was a silent conversation between two warriors, understood only by them, but its meaning was broadcast with perfect clarity to everyone else. The spell was broken when Wallace dropped his hand and gave a slight, formal nod. "You are clear to proceed, Senior Chief," he said, his voice now calm, the storm having passed. "My apologies again for the delay." "Thank you, General," Anya replied, her tone even and professional. She then turned back to her rifle case. With the same methodical, unhurried grace she had displayed from the beginning, she closed the lid, the latches clicking shut with two sharp, final sounds. She checked them both by feel, then straightened up, her rifle case in one hand, her small backpack slung over her other shoulder. She gave a single, brief nod to the dumbstruck police officers and the ashen-faced terminal manager, and then she turned and walked away, melting back into the river of travelers heading for the beacon course. She didn't look back. There was no need. The incident was over. Her part in it was done. As she disappeared from view, a frantic energy erupted in her wake. The terminal manager, Henderson, was babbling apologies to General Wallace, who held up a hand to silence him. "Save it," Wallace commanded. "Get your man to medical, then meet me in your office with your head of security in 5 minutes. We have a great deal to discuss, starting with your training protocols and ending with your supervisor's immediate and permanent future employment." His words were not a suggestion. They were a verdict. Henderson scurried off, shouting into his phone. The police officers, meanwhile, helped a thoroughly broken Marks to his feet. The supervisor didn't say a word. He kept his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor, his face a perfect picture of abject humiliation. The physical pain in his arm was nothing compared to the crushing weight of his public disgrace. He had tried to make himself a giant by making someone else feel small, and in the process he had been revealed as the smallest man in the room. The story of what happened at Checkpoint Charlie began to spread before Anya's flight had even pushed back from the gate. It moved at the speed of gossip, a currency more valuable than money in the closed ecosystem of an airport. It was told in hushed tones by the TSA agents who had witnessed it, their voices a mixture of fear and grudging admiration. It was texted by the police officers to their colleagues at other precincts. "You will not believe what just happened at the airport." It was recounted by the civilian witnesses, the story growing slightly with each telling. The lady in the hoodie became some kind of secret agent. The takedown, already impossibly fast, became a supernatural blur. The general salute became the dramatic climax of a Hollywood movie. Within an hour, the bones of the legend were already in place. The general, true to his word, sat in Henderson's sterile, glass-walled office and systematically dismantled the man's career and his department's culture. He didn't shout. He spoke with a quiet, lethal precision that was far more terrifying. He pulled up the Department of Defense directives on the transport of military firearms by authorized personnel on his phone and made Henderson read them aloud. He pointed out the half-dozen regulations that Marks had violated. He explained the concept of professional courtesy between government agencies. Then he delivered the final, crushing blow. "I'm sure you're aware," Wallace said, looking out the window at a plane taking off. "That's certain. Communities are very small. Word travels fast. The story of how one of your supervisors assaulted a senior chief from DevGru is, as we speak, probably making its way through a rather exclusive network. That unit prides itself on being the quiet professionals. They do not seek attention. But when one of their own is publicly disrespected and physically assaulted, they do not forget." He let the silence hang in the air. "You have a choice, Mr. Henderson. You can either enact a root-and-branch reform of your people's conduct, starting with a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of arrogant abuse of power, or I can make one phone call to a friend of mine at Homeland Security, and your tenure as terminal manager will be over before sunset. The story of your failure will become a permanent case study at Fleck. The choice is yours." Henderson, his face pale and sweating, nodded vigorously. "I understand, General. We will make changes. Immediate changes." The validation of Anya's status was now complete, not just on a personal level, but on an institutional one. The quiet professional had, without seeking it, forced an entire system to confront its own failings. The respect she had been denied was now being mandated from the top down. While this bureaucratic firestorm was raging, Anya herself was 30,000 feet in the air, sitting in a window seat, watching the clouds drift by. She had taken out her data book, the one she had protected with such reflexive speed, and was making a small entry. Not about the incident, not about Marks or the general. She was noting the barometric pressure and temperature from the pilot's pre-flight announcement, mentally calculating the potential deviation for a cold-bore shot at sea level. Her mind was already on her task, on the duty she had to perform. The chaos at the airport was a distraction, a brief, irritating spike in an otherwise controlled environment. It was a problem that had presented itself and a problem that had been solved. It required no more of her mental energy. Her silence and her competence had been her only response, and, as always, they had been enough. The respect she had received from the general was noted and appreciated, but it wasn't necessary for her own self-worth. Her worth was not defined by the opinions of others, but by the quiet, consistent, and lethal perfection of her craft. The world could be loud, arrogant, and ignorant. She would remain quiet, competent, and calm. And that would always be the difference. The legend of Checkpoint Charlie, as it came to be known among airport staff and local law enforcement, did not fade. It metastasized. It became a piece of institutional folklore, a cautionary tale whispered to new TSA recruits and a source of grim amusement in the ready rooms of the airport police department. The story spread like wildfire through the digital barracks of the military community. It started with a single, anonymous post on a popular forum for special operators. The post was short and cryptic. Heard a story today. TSA supervisor at major East Coast hub decided to get handsy with a female traveler carrying a long gun case. Traveler turned out to be Echo from the teams. Ended badly for the supervisor. General Wallace, Rhett, was there confirmed. Stay humble, boys, the post exploded. The comments section became a mix of outrage, dark humor, and reverence. Operators who knew Anya, or knew of her, chimed in with their own stories of her legendary composure and skill. Echo could talk an avalanche into stopping, one comment read. The fact she put hands on him means he crossed a line no sane person would even approach, another wrote. I saw her qualify once. It was like watching a surgeon. No motion. Just perfection. That TSA guy is lucky to be breathing. The name Echo was typed with a kind of reverence, cementing her mythical status to a new generation of warriors who had only heard the stories. The post was screenshot and shared, migrating to other platforms, each time the details becoming slightly more dramatic, the takedown more cinematic, the general salute more theatrical. The core truth, however, remained intact. A quiet professional had been tested by loud arrogance, and competence had won an absolute victory. The ripple effects were not just anecdotal. General Wallace was as good as his word. An official inquiry was launched by the Department of Homeland Security. Supervisor Marks was, as Wallace had predicted, terminated. But he wasn't just cast out. As part of his settlement to avoid further action from the Department of Defense, he was required to attend and later help instruct a newly developed de-escalation and sensitivity training program. The ultimate irony was that the centerpiece of this new program was an anonymized case study of his own spectacular failure. He was forced to stand in front of new recruits and narrate the incident, using his own words, his own actions, as the primary example of what not to do. I made an assumption based on her gender and appearance, he would say, his voice flat and devoid of its former bravado. I did not listen. I did not observe. I saw what I wanted to see, and I ignored the evidence right in front of me. Her calm, her professionalism, her discipline. My ego wrote a check that my body couldn't cash. Do not be me. It was a brutal, humbling penance, but over time, it transformed him. The arrogance was sandblasted away, replaced by a quiet, weary wisdom. He became, ironically, one of the most effective trainers in the program, his personal story a more powerful deterrent to hubris than any textbook or manual. The change rippled through that specific airport's culture. Agents became more observant, more professional. They learned to look for the quiet signs of competence, not just the loud indicators of trouble. The spot on the floor where Marks had been taken down became an unofficial landmark. The staff called it Echo Point. A janitor swore he could still see the scuff marks from his knees. It was a physical reminder of a philosophical lesson. Do not mistake silence for weakness. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Anya arrived at her destination. The memorial service for her fallen teammate, Master Chief Petty Officer David Reaper Morrison, was held at a private gun range owned by a former SEAL. It was a solemn, quiet affair, attended by a small group of men and women who comprised the most elite fighting force on the planet. They were not there in uniform. They were in jeans and worn flannel shirts, their faces etched with a shared, unspoken grief. When the time came for the salute, Anya unkissed the M210. Her movements were a fluid, reverent ritual. She assembled the rifle, chambered the first blank round, and took her position on the firing line. The range officer gave the command. On her signal, she and two other shooters fired in perfect unison. The volley of 3 shots echoed through the valley, a sharp, percussive tribute. They fired 7 times, 21 shots in total, each volley a testament to a life of service and sacrifice. After the final shot, as the smell of cordite hung in the air, Anya cleared the weapon, disassembled it, and laid it back in its case. One of her teammates, a giant of a man known only as Grizz, came and stood beside her. He looked down at the rifle, then at her. "Heard you had a little trouble at the airport," he rumbled, a small smile playing on his lips. He had seen the forum post. Anya didn't look up from her task. "Just clearing a jam," she said, her voice quiet. Grizz chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He knew exactly what she meant. The jam wasn't mechanical. It was human. An obstruction of arrogance and ignorance that had stood in the way of her duty. And she had cleared it with her trademark efficiency. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Dave would have loved that story," he said softly. "He always said you were the calmest storm he'd ever seen." Anya paused for a moment, her hand still on a rifle. A flicker of something, not sadness, but a deep, resonant memory, passed through her eyes. "He taught me how to read the wind," she said. It was a simple statement, but it contained a world of meaning. It was an acknowledgement of legacy, of knowledge passed from one professional to another. The incident at the airport, the legend it spawned, the institutional changes it forced, none of it mattered to her as much as this simple, quiet moment of remembrance. Her competence was not for show. It was for this, for her team, for the legacy of the fallen. A photo was taken that day. It showed 3 shooters on the line, their rifles pointed to the sky. In the center was Anya, a lone woman flanked by 2 titans, all of them equals in skill and spirit. That photo, printed and pinned to the corkboard in the team room back in Virginia Beach, became its own quiet legend. There were no names, no captions. None were needed. Everyone who saw it knew what it represented. A legacy of quiet, lethal professionalism, a bond forged in fire and sealed with respect. It was a symbol of the truth that real strength is not loud. It is steady, it is disciplined, and it is absolute. A year passed. The world turned, missions were executed, and life went on. But the echoes of the incident at Checkpoint Charlie continued to resonate in small, meaningful ways. The Wallace Directive, as the new TSA training module was officially titled, was adopted by 3 other major airports. The case study of Agent M's interaction with Sailor E became a standard part of the curriculum for new hires of the federal law enforcement training centers. The story was stripped of its specific, classified details, but its core lesson remained sharp and clear. Assumption is the enemy of security. Look beyond the surface. Respect professionalism in whatever form it appears. The culture of an entire federal agency was slowly, incrementally, beginning to shift, influenced by the quiet competence of a single operator. The legend of Echo Point at the airport became a tool for mentorship. Veteran TSA agents would take new hires aside, point to the unremarkable patch of linoleum floor, and tell them the story. They told it not to intimidate, but to instruct. "See that spot?" they'd say. "That's where a supervisor's career ended, because he let his ego do his job for him. He judged a book by its cover and found out it was written in a language he couldn't comprehend." Remember that when you're on this line, your job is to see, not to judge. The story became a living piece of institutional memory, a constant reminder of the high cost of arrogance and the quiet power of true expertise. It did more to shape the day-to-day conduct of the officers on the floor than any official manual or directive ever could. The antagonist of the story, former supervisor Marks, found an unexpected and strange form of redemption. His role as a trainer in the new program, born from his own humiliation, gave him a purpose he'd never had as a petty tyrant at the checkpoint. He spoke with the authority of failure, and his words carried a weight that no successful supervisor could ever muster. He taught recruits to look for the tells of a professional: the steady hands, the calm gaze, the economy of motion. He taught them that a person's appearance is the least reliable form of intelligence. In a strange way, he became a champion for the very principles Anya Sharma embodied. He never knew her name, only the anonymous designation sailor, but she had become the defining figure in his life, the ghost whose lesson he was now tasked to teach. He had been humbled, but through that humbling, he had learned the difference between authority and respect. And in teaching that lesson to others, he finally began to earn the latter. For Anya, life continued its steady, demanding rhythm. The incident was a forgotten ripple in her wake. She led her team on 3 more classified deployments, operating in the silent, unseen spaces where the fate of nations is quietly decided. Her reputation as Echo grew, not through boasts or stories, but through the flawless execution of her missions and the survival of the men she served with. Her competence was a shield for those around her, her silence a comfort. She mentored younger operators, teaching them not just how to shoot, but how to see. She taught them the art of stillness, the discipline of observation, the profound strength found in quiet. Her greatest lesson was her own example. She never spoke of her accomplishments. She never had to. Her skills spoke for her, a silent, undeniable testament to her worth. One evening, back at her home base, she was cleaning the M210 after a training exercise. A young SEAL, fresh from selection and new to the team, approached her nervously. He was a mountain of a man, strong, fast, and brimming with the raw, untempered confidence of youth. "Senior Chief," he began, his voice filled with awe. I heard a story about you. About an airport." Anya didn't stop her work. She continued to wipe down the barrel of the rifle with a soft, oiled cloth, her movements precise and rhythmic. She didn't look at him. "There are a lot of stories, kid," she said, her voice neutral. The young SEAL hesitated, then pressed on. "They said you took down a guy without even trying. That a general saluted you. They call the spot Echo Point now." He was hoping for confirmation, for a war story, for a piece of a legend. Anya finished her task and finally looked up at him. Her gaze was not unkind, but it was direct and held a weight that he could feel in his bones. "That's not the point of the story," she said. "The point isn't what I did. The point is what he didn't do. He didn't observe. He didn't listen. He assumed. In our line of work, assumptions get people killed. That's the only part of that story that matters. Understand?" The young SEAL stood straighter, the lesson landing with the force of a physical impact. "Yes, Senior Chief," he said, his voice humbled. "I understand." "Good," she replied. "Now, hand me that bore solvent." We're not done here. In that simple interaction, the true legacy of the event was revealed. It wasn't the takedown. It wasn't the salute. It was the lesson passed down from a master to an apprentice. It was the perpetuation of a philosophy. Competence over talk, discipline over ego, silence over noise. The story had become a parable, a teaching tool that would shape the next generation of quiet professionals, ensuring that the legacy of quiet competence would continue long after the names and details were forgotten. True legacy is not a statue in a park or a name carved on a wall. It is not found in the stories told, but in the lessons learned. It is a current, not a monument. It is the quiet transfer of wisdom from one generation to the next, a ripple of influence that spreads outward, changing the shape of the future in ways both seen and unseen. The story of Anya, Echo, Sharma, and the arrogant supervisor at Checkpoint Charlie was never about one woman's victory or one man's defeat. It was a demonstration of a fundamental truth, that character is revealed not in the noise of self-promotion, but in the quiet of disciplined action. It was a testament to the fact that respect is not a thing that can be demanded by a uniform or a title. It is a thing that is earned, often in silence, through the undeniable evidence of mastery. The supervisor, Marx, sought respect through volume, through public humiliation and the flimsy shield of his position. He believed his authority made him important. Anya sought only to do her duty, to honor a fallen friend. Her importance was an inherent quality, forged in crucibles he could never imagine, and it needed no announcement. The world is full of loud voices demanding attention, clamoring for validation. They build platforms of ego on foundations of sand, believing that the one who shouts the loudest is the one who wins. But true strength, the kind that endures, the kind that can change the world, is almost always quiet. It is the surgeon's steady hand, the engineer's meticulous calculation, the leader's calm resolve in a crisis. It is the quiet professional who focuses on the task, not the applause. It is the unwavering commitment to excellence for its own sake. The changes that rippled out from that single 1.5-second event were not because of the violence, but because of the profound lack of it. Anya's response was so controlled, so precise, so utterly devoid of malice, that it became a moral statement. It was a physical argument for the superiority of discipline over rage. She did not defeat Marx by overpowering him, but by revealing his own lack of control. She held up a mirror, and the reflection broke him. This is the ultimate triumph of the quiet professional. They do not tear down their opponents. They create a standard so high that the arrogant and the ignorant simply collapse under the weight of their own inadequacy. Years from now, new TSA agents will still be learning the lesson of Echo Point. Young SEALs will still be hearing the story of the operator who cleared a jam with nothing but her calm. The legend will persist, not because it is a good story about a fight, but because it is a profound story about character. It speaks to a deep human need to believe that substance will ultimately triumph over style, that skill will conquer arrogance, and that true worth is measured not by the noise you make, but by the impact you have. Anya Sharma would never know the full extent of her influence. She would never know that her simple, disciplined response to a moment of ignorant prejudice would go on to shape policy, change careers, and inspire countless individuals she would never meet. And she wouldn't care, because her purpose was never to be known, but to be effective. Her legacy was not the story told about her, but the quiet, competent, and honorable way she lived her life. It is a legacy written not in headlines, but in the silent, steady execution of duty. It is the echo of a single, perfect action, resonating through time. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent strength defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.